This is the genealogy of Jesus the Messiah, the son of David, the son of Abraham. Abraham was the father of Isaac, Isaac the father of Jacob, Jacob the father of Judah and his brothers. Was Tamar, Perez the father of Hezron, Hezron the father of Abijah, Abijah the father of Manasseh, Manasseh the father of Ammon, Ammon the father of Zerubbabel. From Abraham to David, 14 from David to the exile in Babylon, and 14 from the exile to the Messiah. A few recognizable names, but mostly a list of backstage people whose primary place in the story is to point to somebody else. So why roll these credits at the top? Seeing who Jesus chose to come from shows us who Jesus chose to come for. What if we could be the people in the world where we're sent to see people just like the people that Jesus came from and realize that every single one of them are people that Jesus came for. They may not be a big deal to anybody else, but they're a big deal to him. My name's Chris. I'm one of the pastors here at Doxology. And if we haven't met, there's a decent chance that it's because you are our guest today. And I want to say welcome. We haven't formally said welcome to you as a guest, and so we always want to do that in our services so that you feel more like a guest than a visitor. You know, visitors just show up and it's like, I don't know, like maybe they were expecting us and show up in the parking lot, kind of find your way in, find your way around, maybe grab a stray donut that you find laying around someplace and hope for the best. We want to do better than that. We hope you feel like a guest here. My daughter just had an 11-year-old birthday party not that long ago, and the people that showed up to her party at our house, we gave a gift to. And it was just our way, a little party favor to say, we are so honored that you would celebrate with us. And we want to do that for you if you're our guest. So whether you're joining us online or you're here in the service, we would love to give you a gift. If you're online, you can ask the service host. They'll kind of post something and let you know how to get one of those dropped in the mail to you. But if you're here, make sure you stop by that guest kiosk on the way out if you haven't already. We've got like a real gift. It's not just propaganda about our church. We do have some information about our church that we'd love to give you, but like a real deal gift too, that would just be our way of saying we are honored that you are our guest today and glad that you're here. Welcome to you. Would you grab a Bible if you've got one and meet me in Matthew chapter 1 today. Matthew chapter 1 is where we're going to be this morning as we launch into a new teaching series for Christmas that we've called Backstage Christmas. Backstage Christmas. We'll be in Matthew chapter 1 today. So the husband of one of my really good friends growing up won a Tony Award this year. Yeah, that's sort of a big deal, right? I mean, I don't know how big a deal it is when it comes to entertainment industry stuff. Is there like a pecking order when it comes to those kind of awards? I don't even know how many there are. They're EGOTs, right? So there's the Emmy, there's the Grammy, there's the Oscar, there's the Tony. Is there another one? Are there others? Academy Awards, Oscar, right? I don't know. So he won a Tony, and I guess a Tony is a big deal. It's a big deal to them. He's not a big deal. Well, he's a big deal. He's a big deal to his family, I'm sure. What I mean by that, I guess he won a Tony. He's won several Tonys. So I guess in some respects, he's a big deal. What I mean by saying he's not a big deal, you would have no idea who he is. Never seen his face. He doesn't get recognized on the street. fact, to my knowledge, paparazzi has never shown up with their family eating dinner and snap pictures of them. You know, they live in New York City, but that doesn't ever happen to them. You don't know what he looks like. If he introduced himself to you, the name would not ring a bell. You don't know him. What I mean by saying he's not a big deal, he's not a big deal to you. And yet he is a big deal to some people. He's a big deal to Adina Menzel. She's a big deal. He's a big deal to her. Josh Gad, Lynn Manuel Miranda, Cyndi Lauper. One of my other friends was out with them not that long ago. Stephen had to excuse himself from the dinner table in order to take a quick call from Elton. But his Tony Award didn't even make the broadcast. You didn't hear his speech. It just scrolled his name through in a list of a whole lot of other backstage names. People that are not that big a deal. I guess except to the people who are a really big deal. All the backstage people that you never see, you see. His primary place when it comes to telling the story is to shine the light on somebody else. They're a big deal, just not a big deal to us. And I'm not trying to throw shade on you for them not being a big deal to you. I mean, I think the skip intro button is the greatest invention of the 21st century, maybe even including the iPhone, right? Like, watch the credits once, I get it. But ain't nobody got time to read through a list of 1 million names while we're just waiting to get to some action. And so it is with the Christmas story. Thousands of years of waiting, foreshadowing, prequels, previews. The anticipation has been building, and then it goes silent for 400 years. For 400 years, God seems to not be writing or speaking or directing stories anymore. And then finally, suddenly, the story resumes. And you have this sense that it's the episode that all of the other episodes have been pointing to. So you get the family together, turn the phone on Do Not Disturb, dim the lights, pop the popcorn, settle in, grab the remote and hit play. And the action begins with this, Matthew chapter 1, verse 1. This is the genealogy of Jesus the Messiah, the son of David, the son of Abraham. Abraham was the father of Isaac, Isaac the father of Jacob, Jacob the father of Judah and his brothers. Judah the father of Perez and Zerah, whose mother was Tamar, Perez the father of Hezron, Hezron the father of Ram, Ram the father of Amminadab, Amminadab the father of Nahshon, Nahshon the father of Salmon, Salmon the father of Boaz, whose mother was Rahab, Boaz the father of Obed, whose mother was Ruth, Obed the father of Jesse, Jesse the father of King David. David was the father of Solomon, whose mother had been Uriah's wife. Solomon the father of Rehoboam. Rehoboam the father of Abijah. Abijah the father of Asa. Asa the father of Jehoshaphat. Jehoshaphat the father of Jehoram. Jehoram the father of Uzziah. Uzziah the father of Jotham. Jotham the father of Ahaz. Ahaz the father of Hezekiah. Hezekiah the father of Manasseh. Manasseh the father of Amon. Amon the father of Josiah. And Josiah the father of Jeconiah and his brothers at the time of the exile to Babylon. After the exile to Babylon, Jeconiah was the father of Shealtiel, Shealtiel the father of Zerubbabel, Zerubbabel the father of Abihud, Abihud the father of Eliakim, Eliakim the father of Azar, Azar the father of Zadok, Zadok the father of Achim, Achim the father of Elihud, Elihud the father of Eleazar, Eleazar the father of Mathan, Mathan the father of Jacob, and Jacob the father of Joseph, the husband of Mary, and Mary was the mother of Jesus, who's called the Messiah. Thus there were 14 generations in all from Abraham to David, 14 from David to the exile in Babylon, and 14 from the exile to the Messiah. No wonder Linus reads from Luke's account. Of all the ways to start the most compelling story in all of human history, Matthew makes the decision to start it in a way that has all of us dive in for a remote to hit the skip intro button in the 5 seconds we have before we lose our chance. We get credits. A few recognizable names, but mostly a list of backstage people whose primary place in the story is to point to somebody else. So with apologies to the weird uncle that all of us have who's obsessed with Ancestry.com, and with apologies to those of you who are just finding out that we all think you're the crazy uncle because you're obsessed with Ancestry.com. Like, what are we doing here, Matthew? Well, a couple of things maybe. First, it's more than credits. These backstage people tell a backstory. And their presence here at the very beginning of the story is an important feature to tell us what kind of story it is. It's not just a once upon a time story. It's not a fable. It's not a myth. It's not even a novel or a film that just starts. Not a once upon a time story. Matthew wants you to know that it's a story with a history, and that it's a story from history. Christmas story is not just a bedtime story for kids. Matthew, who, remember, was an eyewitness to the story, wants you to know that God has done something in human history. Christmas is a historical event. The Christmas story has a history. But maybe even more than that, Matthew presents it as a certain kind of history. Here's what one scholar says. For many cultures, ancient and modern, certainly in the Jewish world of Matthew's day, a genealogy was the equivalent of a roll of the drums, a fanfare of trumpets, and a town crier calling for attention. Like a great procession down a city street, we watch figures at the front and ones in the middle, but all eyes are waiting for the one who comes in the position of greatest honor right at the very end. And yet, with respect to N.T. Wright, a closer look makes us wonder if the little drummer boy playing the drum roll had stopped for some eggnog first. When it comes to this parade that walks down the street, there are more than a few of us that wonder when we look at them, what are they doing in this parade? Matthew seems to go out of his way to bring out stories from Jesus' history that show off the mess in Jesus' family tree. Why? Because he's hoping that you'll recognize that all Jesus' history is not just a story about them. They point a story about him, and perhaps to a story that includes all of us. See, you know that saying, you can't choose your family? That was true for you. It's true for me. That wasn't true of Jesus. Because Jesus existed before his family, he got to choose the family he was from. Jesus chose who he came from. That's a powerful thought. Maybe especially when you see who it is exactly that Jesus chose to come from. The first few names in there are names you'd expect. They're stars in their own right, and yet they play a supporting role in this story. See the name of David the king. David the king who was promised a son who would rule on the throne forever. If you've been around Doxology for at least the last several months, you've heard about Abraham. We spent the whole fall in the story of Abraham. You know a little about his story. the father of the Jewish faith, right? He was promised a land. He was promised a seed. He was promised a blessing. The seed would be so blessed that the blessing would overflow out of him to the nations of the earth. He had a son named Isaac. Isaac had a son named Jacob. All of those guys, if you know their story, they were guys that were marked by strong faith in God. Sometimes, more often, their lives are stories of brokenness within them that broke the stories of people around them. They couldn't seem to stay out of their own way. Despite their good intentions, despite even their religious convictions, a close look at their life, maybe at your life, it's a mixed bag. That's who Jesus chose to come from. They're not really a surprise, but then there are some surprises. In fact, if you look there, verse 3, it says, Judah, the father of Perez and Zerah, whose mother was Tamar. Perez, the father of Hezron, Hezron, the father of Ram, Ram, the father of Amminadab, Amminadab, the father of Nahshon, Nahshon, the father of Salmon, Salmon, the father of Boaz, whose mother was Rahab. Boaz, the father of Obed, whose mother was Ruth. Obed, the father of Jesse, Jesse, the father of King David. David was the father of Solomon, whose mother had been Uriah's wife. So you may be aware of this. Ancient genealogies wasn't common to list the mom. Not just Jewish genealogies, any historical genealogies. Jewish stories were sometimes the exception. There were 4 women that tended to be named when Jewish stories were told. They get honored and named as the matriarchs of the faith. There were 4 of them: Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah. So it might have been a tiny bump in the genealogy if you read the mother of, but not when you realize there's 4. You would have expected those 4. Certainly not these 4. The matriarchs that Matthew chooses to go with, the first one's Tamar. You see her right there, right after Judah? Remember her story? Judah was her father-in-law. He defrauded her of a husband after her husband died, so she dressed up like a prostitute, went out to where she knew he would be, and then 3 months later reveals she's pregnant. Some of us have stories like that in our families, but they're not the kind of stories that we talk about out loud, except maybe with our therapist. They're sure not the way we want to be introduced to people. Jesus is. Verse 5, the second mother's Rahab. She didn't just dress like a prostitute, she was one. We meet her in the book of Joshua. She's trapped in this life that she probably didn't want, but didn't think she could choose her way out of for any number of reasons. Some of you, different circumstances, you feel stuck in a story that you can't get unstuck from, even if the circumstances are different. Matthew wants your ears to perk up right about now. Someone like you is a part of this story. Ruth, she's got a great story, even a whole book of the Bible named after her. She was also a Moabite. The Moabites were thought of as inbred mutts. Their story begins with Lot and his daughters. Her history, Ruth's, is a mixed bag of tragedy and poverty. Some of us can relate to that. We feel like abandoned mutts. And how much is a mutt worth, really? Not much. Unless the mutt's a part of your family. Then there's woman number 4. She's not even mentioned by name. Verse 6 talks about King David and the woman who had been Uriah's wife. Remember that story? King David compelled the wife of another man to come to his palace while her husband was off at war. And when she got pregnant, David tried to cover his tracks, and he couldn't. So he had her husband killed and married the widow so that he could look like a hero. And check it out. That's not even this kid. Solomon came along afterwards. There's no reason that Matthew had to draw attention to that story in this scene, but he did. He shines the spotlight on that story in the history of who Jesus chose to come from. Solomon's kid was Rehoboam. Rehoboam was a power-hungry narcissist who ends up destroying his legacy and everything else in his path. He knows better. He even hears better from the people that are closest to him. But in the face of common sense and wisdom, destroys his family and everybody he was supposed to serve. My guess is that feels a little more familiar to some of us than a story from somebody else's history. Then there's Jeconiah, verse 11, who's so evil that God put a curse on him so that no blood relative of his would ever be the king. It's actually one of the reasons that the virgin birth is so important to the Christmas story. Because Jeconiah is Joseph's relative, not Mary's. Jesus was adopted into Joseph's lineage and yet exempt from the curse. But nevertheless, Jeconiah, not a person that you would volunteer was a part of your story if you got the chance to tell your story. He's not someone that you would choose to come from. So why did Jesus? And why did Matthew go out of his way to make sure we know? Because right from the very beginning, Matthew wants you to see something about the person that he'd witnessed in person. And Matthew, the tax collector, if you know anything about his story, he was better positioned to tell it than almost anybody else. Why did Matthew start the story this way? To introduce God's promised king? Absolutely. To prove that Jesus has a right legally to the throne of David? For sure. To trace God's faithfulness to God's promises, despite the unfaithfulness of God's people going back generations and thousands of years? Without a doubt. But all of that could have been accomplished without a whole bunch of these names. So why roll these credits at the top? Here's why. Seeing who Jesus chose to come from shows us who Jesus chose to come for. Seeing who Jesus chose to come from shows us who Jesus chose to come for. People with a past. People who can't stay out of their own way. People whose lives and whose stories are marked with beautiful expressions of life and love and ugly choices of brokenness and evil that often get jumbled up in the very same stories. Heroes, villains, deceivers, no-names, and outlaws, and right guys and southpaws. People who, for a variety of reasons, feel like no big deal in the story. They get included in the story because it turns out they're a big deal to the biggest deal of all. They're who he chose to come from because you are who he chose to come for. So what do you do with that? Well, it maybe depends on which you are. In a room like this, I imagine there are some of us, more than one of us, who come to the Christmas season for the magic, the tradition, but not really much more than that. Like the star, the shepherds, the lights, the magic, manger, all of that stuff gets jumbled together with all of the traditions and the fairy tales and the superstitions. And the reminders from church people that Jesus is the reason for the season, they don't bother you. They really don't move the needle for you either. Jesus sort of ranks with all of the other mythological characters who show up in our stories at Christmas. But what if he's not? What if he's more than that? What if God really has broken into human history in the person of Jesus? And a guy named Matthew really did witness it with his own eyes. Don't you at least owe it to yourself to check it out? If it's true, it's the greatest news story in all of history. And it's anchored in real, verifiable, historical fact. But don't start there. Matthew didn't start believing with Christmas. Babies are born all the time. Jesus wasn't even the first religious leader to be born. He certainly wasn't the last. Matthew didn't believe because a baby was born. He believed because a dead man rose from the grave and Matthew saw him in person. And from there, Matthew went back to answer the question, how in the world did I miss who he is until now? It's like all the pieces clicked into place for him. God's promises, God's work to restore creation through redeeming his people. It's not just a religious system. It's happening in history. And it's happening in current events. And if it's true who Jesus is, if it's true why Jesus came, if it's true what Jesus is doing, it can be true for you. And some of you know that. And you're convinced that it's true. But I'm imagining some of you are wondering how it could possibly be true for you. Or true for you anymore. With who you are. With where you've come from. With what you've done. What's been done to you. It's hard to imagine that God would be interested at all in someone like you. Do you see? Jesus specifically chose to come from people just like you, so that there would never be any doubt that Jesus chose to come to someone just like you. Like David, mostly a hero with some skeletons in your closet, perhaps that nobody has discovered yet. Maybe like Abraham, really good. Maybe better than most. But nobody's going to confuse you with somebody who has it all together. Rahab, an honorable person with a past that you can't unstick from. Tamar, the victim of a broken family story. Judah, the person that broke the broken family story. Rehoboam, a person with incredible potential that squandered it. Or maybe like Azer, a faceless name in the crowd nobody really knows anything about. Not a big deal to anyone, except the biggest deal of all. This is not just credits. This isn't an intro you should skip. This intro is an invitation. Whoever you are, whatever you've done, wherever you've been, whatever's been done to you, wherever you came from, there is a place for you in the family of Jesus. You're invited into his story. And notice, from the very beginning, this isn't what a pastor may have told you at some point, or somebody at church camp, the last day of church camp, inviting you to invite Jesus into your life. That's fine. There's a place for that. That's not this. This isn't invite Jesus into your story. It's college football season, people giving speeches after the games. It's award show season for all kinds of different things. It's still pretty normal for people to list Jesus in the credits. Sometimes even at the top of the credits when they're giving people credit, that's fine. He gets listed on our list because we've invited him into our story. That's not this. In fact, this is so much better than that. This is not us inviting Jesus to be a part of our story. This is Jesus inviting us to be a part of his. Matthew's perspective, you see it all the way through the book of Matthew, is that Jesus' story is both the fulfillment of history and the future of history. Jesus' life is not just a vision for one type of life that works. It's not just an option, not just a tradition. It's a template for how to do life the way God designed it to be done. And all of us have fallen short of that. It shows us life that works. It's the best way to do humanity. And he lived that life for you so that he could give that life for you, so that he could give that life to you. But it's a gift, and you have to receive it. It's an invitation, and you have to say yes. And for some of you, that's a step that you're ready to take. Not into a religion, not into a tradition, not into a superstition, a step from the death that you've been living into the life that Jesus is giving. You can receive it right where you sit. It's as simple as right where you are, drawing an X through all of your good religious intentions, all of your trying hard to be a little bit better, and receiving the invitation to let him pay for all of your shortcomings, to come live within you, to give you hope and a future and his life for you, in you, through you, from here through all of eternity. And he offers that to you as a gift that you simply have to say yes to. You can do that right where you sit today. My guess is there are some of us who have received that gift perhaps a long time ago. We're part of the family. Warts, blemishes, crazy uncles, all of it. What do we do with our past? What do we do when our past keeps showing up in the present? Well, look at how Jesus relates to his. You notice he doesn't sweep it under the rug. He doesn't whitewash it, doesn't deny it, doesn't try to hide it, or say that the ugly parts aren't really there. He says, I'm bringing my kingdom to reign over it, to restore it, to redeem it, and to triumph over it anyway. And that's what he wants to do in you. It's what he wants to do for you. It's what Jesus wants to do through you. See, these people that Jesus chose to be from, people that Jesus shows that he came for, you notice these people are not just us as individuals. Those people are all around us. People who need hope. People who need help. People with names and faces and stories and pasts that you and I get introduced to every single day. Some of them that we've been introduced to a long, long time ago. And in a world where it's so easy to just reach for the remote and hit skip intro, where it's so easy to just rush through the names and the faces and the stories and the past to go to something that interests us beyond people that are not a big deal to us. What if we were the people who decided to take a step below the surface? A step beyond just the hurry of the season. What if we could be the people in the world where we're sent to see people just like the people that Jesus came from and realize that every single one of them are people that Jesus came for? They may not be a big deal to anybody else, but they're a big deal to him. Uniquely positioned in your life and history to receive an invitation into his story. What do you do with that? Well, which you are you? Would you bow your head with me? Lord, I pray for the person who is just filled with cynicism. They're skeptical. They're filled with doubts. I'm so grateful for them. So grateful that they would take the courage to be at a place like this, wherever they're here, whether it's to check it out or just because somebody that they likes you. I pray that you'd give them the courage to check out the story from history and to come to a conclusion that's true. Lord, I pray for the person who has been religious their whole life, who's tried hard their whole life, who's been better than most their whole life, but has never said yes to the invitation of your life. That they would do that in this moment, trusting that you came and lived the life they should have lived and died the death they deserve to die, to offer us life that's beyond what we could even imagine. And for those of us that have received that gift, let us never take it for granted. And let us be quick to allow that gift to overflow out of us, those blessings to be sent from here to the places that we're sent and ultimately to the ends of the earth, the greatest news possible. Would you let us backstage people carry it everywhere we go? In Jesus' name, amen.
Hey, thanks for watching. If something you heard resonated with you today, we would love to connect with you. Visit doxology.church/connect or leave a comment below. And if you enjoyed today's message and you want to see more, make sure you give this video a like and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss any new videos.